Hi everybody, Rad Mom here. Welcome back to the garden. Tonight we're going to be taking on the flaws of feminism head on. But first, like the video if you enjoy feminism from a materialist perspective, and subscribe to the channel for more of it. We're going to be taking on some of feminism's specific flaws. Tonight we have an intelligent young lady from a YouTube channel called The 8th Square here to articulate these problems for us. Because flaws, feminism definitely has. What happens if you're not a conservative woman, but at the same time, you cannot swallow the idea that you're just the same as men? Apparently you do a lot of reading and come to some of your own conclusions. And her conclusions are strong. And actually, we're going to be digging into some pretty meaty stuff here tonight. So thank you so much for joining me. Let's do it.
Bax says that the modern women's movement is based at least partly on an assumption that he says is unfounded, which is that man has systematically oppressed women in the past, and that the natural tendency of man is that he's evil-minded and he always wants to oppress women, or that woman is the victim of the man's ego. He says that if you're a student of history, anthropology, physiology, you should see that this is not a sound view, and that the feminist sees evidence of male oppression in the place woman occupies in social and political life, rather than it being the natural consequence of her biological makeup, i.e. her secondary sexual characteristics and the natural average inferiority which flows therefrom.
I think it can be really hard to hear a young woman say some of these things.
Today I am discussing the first title in what I call the anti-feminist canon. This is a series where I read books about feminism, women's rights, gender relations, etc. And that includes anti-feminism, a topic close to my own heart. I couldn't find an anti-feminist canon list on the internet, so these books are entirely of my own choosing. And we're going to kick things off with The Fraud of Feminism by Ernest Belfort Bax, which was published in 1913. Yes, you heard that right. As to why I chose the book, I think the title says it all, and it was the earliest book I could find that explicitly argues specifically against the ideology of feminism and feminist activists.
The book she's quoting from is over 100 years old, but it's going to sound pretty familiar to all of us. The thesis statement seems to be that men haven't oppressed women. Women are just inferior. No, that's misogyny.
So who is the author, Ernest Belfort Bax? It's quite a name. He was an English barrister, as well as a journalist, philosopher, historian, and a socialist. But don't hold the socialism against him. I promise you, he knows his shit when it comes to feminism.
And this man, this British barrister, feels entitled to define all women and have the final say on what we are and what our movement is about. Where in the fuck does he get off? Carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man, right ladies?
Bax was also an advocate for the social and legal rights of men. He was an active anti-feminist because he said feminism was failing to address inequities for both sexes evenly.
Feminism addresses the inequities between the sexes unevenly, does it? That's because it's a women's movement. He thought he was making a point here. But like, feminism is not for everybody.
Bax wrote many articles on this topic, and he expressed the view that women's suffrage would shift the balance of power totally in women's favor. And his concerns about men's equality led to his interest in socialism, which he saw as a potential solution for men being exploited by the capitalist system.
Socialism is the answer for men, but not women. I admit that I'm a little confused on this point, because women, I guess, are going to be stuck at home cleaning the kitchen and having the babies no matter what.
So Bax talks about different conceptions of men and women in terms of sexual function. He cites Otto Weininger in a book called Sex and Character, who says that while men has a sex, woman is a sex.
Hey man, your misogyny is showing again.
Woman is only sexual, but man is also sexual. That the parts of a man that get sexually excited are localized, and it happens in spurts with intervals of rest, and that his sexual organs are an appendix and he can separate himself mentally from his sexual urges.
Yeah, he wishes. He wishes. And I think, honestly, that might be a big part of a lot of men's inferiority complex, that no, they really can't separate themselves from their sex drive. And they're really not sure at the end of the day if everything that they do isn't actually to try and impress women. Project much.
Whereas for women, their sexual excitement is diffused over the whole body, and the sex element is just part of her whole nature.
How in the hell do you even know this? How do you know it's like,
So therefore, man represents the intellectual, moral, and technical development of humanity, while woman's chief purpose is to procreate and further the race in that respect. Bax says that because men's sexual instinct kind of comes on suddenly and it's a need, not a want, that men need more latitude and flexibility in their sexual behavior. So the conduct expectations for men and women cannot be equal.
Those sexual spurts are a need, not a want. So of course men need more leeway. I mean, really, could this guy have just been any more blatantly rationalizing his own desires and, the way men like to operate? How many different ways do you think that they could come up with to rationalize what they want to do? Sit back, job done, and claim that that's what nature intended all along, because see, it's logical.
He describes hysteria as, quote, certain pathological mental symptoms in women open to everybody's observation and denied by no one unprejudiced by feminist views. He says that any man can see these symptoms in a quarter to a third of women that he's known personally. It's just common sense. Everyone can see it. And, quote, it is for nothing that women and children have always been classed together. That this is a view only challenged by feminists.
Yeah, because we're the ones that the drones go off to protect. On a grand scale, men are disposable. Not that they are on a moral level, you understand. That's a totally different thing, but they know this. They know this. And every once in a while, you'll catch, like, the pickup artists or the MGTOWs talking about it. About how they're the drones, and they know it.
Bax points out the absence of female genius throughout history and that there are very few women with a high degree of talent.
Cites the absence of female genius throughout history. Funny thing about that is that this book seems to just be a giant exercise in confirmation bias. He points at the way the world was 100 years ago and was like, there, see, that's how it's supposed to be. I told you. It's the essence of conservative thought. Everything's fine because he's fine.
He says this shows the inferiority of the average woman compared to the average man. He says that feminists will sometimes acknowledge this, but they will say it's because women were oppressed in the past. But he points out that heredity could not solely go through the female line. That is to say, even if your mother was oppressed, your father wasn't. So if they're positing that somehow oppression trickles down through the genetic line, and that is why women have some inferiority to men on average, that would be mitigated by the genetic inheritance from her father, who was not oppressed.
Historical oppression is not a genetic argument. Women are not genetically inferior because our ancestors were treated badly. Secondly, no. It's on a much more individual and granular level. Because an individual woman might have had all kinds of dreams and aspirations and talents and skills and whatever, and it wouldn't have mattered because she'd have been raped or killed or both if she had decided to try to do anything but go the hell home and have babies. They enforced this shit through violence. That, it didn't matter what you wanted to do or how talented or how smart you were. If you were female, you didn't get to choose.
Bax raises the question of biology when it comes to political feminism's demands. He says modern feminists will say that excluding women from the franchise is logically incompatible with the idea of universal suffrage in the modern idea of democracy. But Bax says that demands to extend suffrage have been based on removing class, race, and wealth barriers. Social barriers, yes, but not barriers based on deep underlying organic difference, that is to say, biological difference.
Silly women's. The suffrage movement was about removing social barriers, not real ones. Disgusting and weird how far back some of these ideas, all of these ideas, who am I kidding?
He says one must ask if the biological difference involves intellectual and moral differences, and if they exist, do those differences involve general inferiority or at least render the female sex unfit to exercise political functions?
Must we though? Why do they always go straight there, huh? Because demonstrating female inferiority was their predetermined goal. Some poor woman got economically and socially coerced into marrying this fucker.
Should women be allowed to vote? That's what he's asking. It's a question I've asked myself many a time. Whether or not hysteria is a real thing, it's certainly true that women are more susceptible to mental health issues related to their hormones. Hormonal imbalances can be the cause of anxiety, depression, irrational rage, general irritability, and much more.
Right, because men don't know anything about irrational rage, do they? They've built an entire culture around irrational rage. Sports, war. The more macho it is, the more based it is around irrational rage. Only women are capable of irrational rage. Maybe the rage seemed irrational to him because he didn't take the time to try and understand it.
Now, I won't necessarily say that I don't think that women should have the vote, though I do question it a lot. I think that the law should equally apply to men and women, not just in how it's written, but in its administration. The only question is, can that ever be achieved? Is it fair to allow all women to have the ability to vote just because some women, like me, actually want the equal administration of the law, but a lot of women do not, whether explicitly or more subconsciously. They may think they're totally for equality, but when push comes to shove, actually they don't. They're fine with having all the same rights and privileges with none of the responsibilities.
Women secretly don't want the vote, just like we secretly want to be dominated and raped, right? That is a dangerous path to go down, honey.
Whether a woman shaves under her arms or not has nothing to do with how feminine she acts, how feminine she is. Or if Marilyn Monroe decided to put on a construction worker's uniform, that would not inherently make her more masculine all of a sudden. Like I said, this has come up in my personal life in conversations with other women. This is something I think about a lot. When I was younger, I did not dress feminine at all. But then in my 20s, I started to wear dresses and skirts all the time. But wearing dresses did not suddenly change the way I interacted with the world. I find it hard to define what is a feminine way of acting or a masculine way of acting, but I do believe that there is a difference.
Female psychology exists. I wrote a blog post about it. I will link it down below. It's measurable and observable. We're not the same.
Everyone has some mix of both, but I think most people present predominantly as one or the other. Most people are generally more in their masculine energy or in their feminine energy. For me, I can be in my feminine energy, but it's not as natural for me. My natural resting place is more in my masculine energy.
I hadn't heard anything about this in so long. I used to argue with myself about this too. Why is something like aggression or independence labeled masculine? Archetypally, I get it, but like maybe it should stay there. Maybe we shouldn't be thinking of these personality traits in terms of whether they have masculine energy or feminine energy. Maybe we should just be thinking about them in terms of their practical application to our lives.
One of the ways that I know that I am more in my masculine energy most of the time than my feminine energy is not only because I have been told this directly by many different people over the years, both men and women, and have even been described, direct quote, as masculine of center, but also because so many times when men describe their experiences, whether in stand-up, in conversations with me, things that I'm reading in articles or Reddit posts, I relate so hardcore. I'm like, I feel you, bro. This is why I'm married to a man and not a woman, despite how sexy I do find a lot of women. But I think I've learned to temper the excesses of my masculine energy as I've gotten older. But I was always the kind of person who was very independent, very aggressive.
I wish that she had thought to ask herself why the masculine end of the pool feels more natural to her. Could it be because we were raised in a culture of male values? Could it be a little bit of internalized misogyny? I've noticed that a lot of these women are very intelligent, but really just refuse to look at their internalized misogyny and what it really is. They don't end up working through it, they suppress it, and they end up kind of going this Randian way. They become sort of the uber libertarian. He'll never be the ubermensch, he's a dude. I heard Ayn Rand recently called the final boss of girl bosses. I think that was Maggie Mayfish. Mwah. I want to credit her because that's freaking brilliant. If it had been written by a man, it would probably be completely unapproachable for women. But it wasn't. It was written by a woman. So, you know, there's certain aspects of it that appeal also to women. Apparently.
If women were powerful, then couldn't they just seize the power from men? Why do they need men to step back? As I've said before, if men would just take the boot off our neck, then we could come into our power. We can't grab their ankle and throw them to the ground. No. We need to just be like, hey, Mr. Oppressor, can you just not? And
yes! We need to stop waiting for the men to all agree with us before we do anything. Yes. This is a really good point. This is a big point that I think a lot of intelligent young women are very frustrated by. I know I was, have been, still am. Why in the hell do we have to get consensus before we can just go ahead and make women full equal citizens? Why do we have to figure out whether or not men and women are exactly the same before we decide that women are human?
she makes the blasphemous claim that men and women are different and have different values and write about different things, but that what men value is prized more. And so what men write about, like writing about war, is seen as serious and important, whereas women writing about personal relationships and social interactions is not seen as important. Which is still a point the feminists make today. Once they've moved the goalposts from the whole men and women are just the same and we're all all equal. Once you've gotten them to admit that men and women are different and they value different things, they will say, and we need to get the feminine up there.
Ah, this is the big one right here. This is feminism's fatal flaw. Men and women are not the same. Because if we were, we wouldn't have any unique physical needs that would A, make us more vulnerable, B, need addressed by the structures of society. If men and women were exactly the same, then none of this shit would even be an issue. The idea that we can attempt to argue for ourselves as unique beings with unique wants and needs, and while at the same time saying, nah, but it's fine, we're really just like you, is absurd. And it is why feminism has completely stalled and started to backslide. Because we've lost the plot.
So I don't think it's that women can't be geniuses or create works of genius, but I think that most women don't have the mind or personality for it.
Not with that attitude.
If they do have the seed of potential, they choose to do other things. This is a point that Esther Villar touches on in The Manipulated Man, which I have not finished reading, but essentially that women have some potential when they start out, but they choose to go on this path to get married and have kids and not to nurture any of that, or to spend the incredible amount of time and focus and dedication it takes to do anything great.
What the fuck do you think it takes to be a parent? Raising kids takes all that and more. Multitasking, organizational skills, getting over your own shit when it's triggered by being on the opposite end of a situation that traumatized you as a kid. Shit like that.
How many women not only have the personality to take that kind of risk?
You want to talk about risk? How about pregnancy? 1/3 of all pregnancies spontaneously terminate themselves. It might be high reward if you get all the way to the end, but there's no guarantee that you'll get there, and even if you do, you could die. But yeah, women don't know anything about taking risks.
But also to spend the hours that it would take to get that good. I think that in current year, there is nothing stopping a woman who wants to be creative from being creative. And I think there's nothing stopping a woman with the seeds of genius within from creating that work of genius.
Spoken like a child. I don't know which part of the world you're talking about. I assume the West. In a lot of other parts of the world, there are myriad things keeping women from expressing themselves creatively. There are still places around the world where girls are not taught to read and write. And as far as over here in the West, there's still a lot of soft power that loves to coalesce itself kind of out of nowhere to oppose you just almost instantaneously. There are a lot of things that aren't official boys clubs anymore that are still boys clubs. And if you're the one woman in that room, boy, you know it. There's also a lot of societal and cultural norms and morals that, God forbid you should step sideways of one of those. Women are judged a lot more harshly and a lot more superficially. It's a common complaint that you'll talk about the male politician's policies and the female politician's suit pants. There's nothing stopping us. I hope that you run into fewer barriers than a lot of us do. Yeah, you just sound naive here. Honey, I'm sorry.
But I do think there is a distinction between creativity and genius, and it's sometimes hard to tell in Woolf's book if she's really making a separation between the two, because women do very well in the creative space. Will there ever be a female Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci? I don't know. I kind of think no.
As far as the female Michelangelo or whatever, she was probably married off to somebody when she was a young teenager. And was never taught to fucking paint.
I think maybe there's like a 1 in a billion somewhere out there, but it seems like biology did not predispose women to have the kind of obsessive focus and the kind of brain needed to create true works of genius. Certainly not the average woman, certainly not even the above average woman. We're talking like 0.1% of the population, maybe.
What do you think being a mom is? His obsessive focus on this one little person and every little thing about them for like 20 years. Also, ADHD is a thing. And there is a flip side to the inattentive focus thing called hyperfocus. Yeah, which when I was young was like my vacation. That was how I used to blow off steam. I can sit and do one thing for 4, 6, 8, 10 hours without eating. Cursing whenever I have to get up to pee, okay? It has to be the right thing. And it has to be at the right time. Because inspiration's fickle that way. But this has not been my experience at all. Consequently, I don't think this is a sex-based thing, and I think you might just kind of be making it up as you go along now. Alright, so who is this girl anyway? We're gonna let her say a little bit about herself.
I'm much more comfortable calling myself a libertarian these days than a classical liberal. Classical liberal probably still applies, but I think that libertarian is probably more accurate. I don't really feel like I've read enough or know enough of the arguments to really say, okay, I'm a libertarian.
Well, she admits she hasn't read enough to call herself a libertarian. That's good. Because I dare say you're right about that.
But on the axis of authoritarianism versus libertarianism, which is what I really care about, I'm definitely a libertarian.
What is this axis, though? This weird false dichotomy. Authoritarianism and to libertarianism spectrum? What? Tyranny to liberty? Like that might be a spectrum. But I don't know where she got. I've never heard this before. I've never heard this framing before. Has anybody heard this? Where did she get this? Is this more Jordan Peterson? Because no, libertarians are the people who want the government out of their business. It's I've got mine, fuck you. That's libertarianism.
And I know that a lot of people on the left and progressives call themselves liberals. They don't realize that progressive and liberal mean something different, especially because a lot of people on the right talk about libtards and owning the libs when really they're talking about either lefties, left-wingers, or progressives. I was trying to preserve the word liberal, and I still think it means what it means, that liberalism has a meaning. But when you're talking to people who consider themselves liberals but are actually progressive, calling yourself a libertarian helps them understand a little bit better that, oh, actually, we have very different values.
I'm impressed by her grasp of the actual political landscape that we see before us, right? Because progressives are not liberal. Little L liberal. So I feel like she's confusing capital L liberal with little L liberal. Got liberal with a big L, which is classical liberalism, John Locke, Adam Smith, the founding fathers, all that stuff. And then you have little L liberal, which is laissez-faire, non-judgmental, happy-go-lucky, easygoing liberal with a little L. And those are two different things. One of the big absurdities about modern life is that, 250 years ago, the idea that an average person could build up his own personal wealth and should have a say in how the government was run and all that stuff was literally revolutionary. But that was 250 years ago. And so now we live in a world where liberal ideas are conservative. The United States was founded upon these ideas. They are literally the establishment. And that is one of the key absurdities of modern life that she stumbled upon here, I think.
I do still feel an alienation when it comes to women that I can talk to. Honestly, the only woman that I can speak almost freely on political topics would probably be my mother, which is very strange.
Alienated from other women. Boy, I really relate to that too. I would wager it has something to do with the internalized misogyny, the disdain for other women that she shows in most of her videos. It's just projection. Whatever we hate the most in other people is what we despise the most in ourselves, right? So, yeah, I think a lot of that alienation would probably dissipate. And I'm also speaking from experience, would dissipate if you would actually do some internal work and try and figure out who you really are underneath all of the programming. She seems to have come to some of these conclusions herself, which in my book makes her smarter than 75% of the people out there.
I've always had strong female friendships, but I've always felt this disconnect from certain aspects of female friendship expectations, I suppose.
I think we all feel disconnected from fake expectations we have been given in place of a genuine female culture. Basically everything that women used to be taught has been overruled and overwritten by male values, including what female friendships are supposed to be. A lot of us feel alienated from that, and we blame ourselves, we blame each other. I get it. I feel like I get it. I really, really relate to this. But conservatives are not your friends, honey. Misogynists are not your friends. Being the pick-me girl just means that you're the only one there when they decide it's time to turn on you.
So I guess I'm kind of hoping that this YouTube channel can help connect me with other women that I could talk to, even if it's only through the internet.
This young woman is reaching out for community by making these videos. Feminism should be that community, right? For intelligent young women who are trying to figure this world out and how to make it better. Feminism should be her community. And the fact that it doesn't even occur to her that she has any place there speaks to the complete and utter failure of feminism. Feminism is failing her. So that's just a few of the problems we have going on. I think that this young lady's done a very good job of articulating a lot of them for us, and I think she's done a very good job of demonstrating just how coherent and logical something can be and still be so very off base. Gosh, I wish I was as well read at that age. I wish I was that well read now. But there's really no substitute for actually going out and living for a while, having the benefit of having done that. I know from experience that she's wrong about a lot of these things, but you know, that's just how it is. You have to let them learn on their own. But somebody should be giving them the tools. You know, the idea that a young woman who is so intelligent and trying to figure things out on her own like this would call herself an anti-feminist when, you know, just her very existence is, I would consider very feminist just in its own right. She doesn't know what she's talking about, but that's not her fault. She's clearly tried to figure out what the fuck she's talking about. And the fact that the information that she needs isn't even out there anywhere. The only way to get it is to wait and get it from experience. We have to do better for them. We have to do better for them.